Hi, and welcome to Cancel's Lean6Sigma Purple Belt interview series, where we discuss leadership skills and the Six Sigma approach. So, my name is Riaan du Plooy. I'm the CEO of and partner of Cancel and Lean6Sigma Academy. Um, we focus on consulting with a firm focusing on creating high performing, self reliant achievers. So, today I'm here with Jeni Yelton, founder and executive consultant for Purpose Driven Solutions. We've been talking for a while and we thought it would be a great idea to record these sessions. Um, she's aligning purpose driven approach to business strategy. Thank you for joining me today, Jenny. It's always a pleasure having chats with you and all of our different discussions.
Yes.
So yeah, today we're just going to talk about leadership development, your experience in it, so yeah, take it away. What can you tell me?
That's a great question. It's interesting. I've been working in leadership development for almost 25 years. I can't believe they allowed me to start in kindergarten. It really is kind of
I know
surprising that I started
time
so young.
flies, right?
Yeah, I know, I know. Uh, and I went to, I really have a passion for not only leaders and how to develop leaders, but really, what's their purpose in being a leader? Sometimes
Yeah,
people get promoted because they're really good at their job, but that doesn't mean that they're prepared to inspire, engage, and lead others. And I really think there's a big difference between being a manager who
yeah,
dictates tasks and being a leader who gets people to perform and brings the best out of their people and is
yes,
aligned towards a purpose and a goal. So the last couple years, that's where focused my energy is how do I get managers to see the potential and the opportunities in others and be able to encourage and inspire others to perform
yeah,
beyond just completing the day-to-day tasks of a job and really shifting the idea of a culture ahead of just there to get a paycheck, just there to be with people they like, to something where they feel like they're achieving a purpose beyond themselves. So that's where my strengths are, and that's where my passion is and my
yeah.
purpose. So that's a little bit about my background. If you want me to tell you everything I know about leadership, it could be a really long
That's gonna
conversation,
be a
but
long
yes.
episode. Yeah,
Yeah, it's really, and you have to think about like where's the interest right now. And so that's where when you and I first started talking about this purple belt and understanding that, as part of project management, there is this piece of leading people through projects. And so
yeah,
I really think that belt, that purple belt and really kind of getting into I don't like to call them soft skills. I like to call them more behavioral skills.
it is.
That's
Yeah.
yeah. So that's kind of why I think it's a great conversation for us to have. So, tell me a little bit about what your thought was in, leadership skills and the importance of including that in like your, Six Sigma and the purple belt and those types of things.
So it's interesting though. I mean, exactly the same experience. I mean, I've had it personally in my life, and I've seen it happen to millions of people out there. You know that basically because you're good at doing something, a task, or managing a role, then usually you get up, put up for promotion. They move you up, and all of a sudden you become a leader instead of just doing tasks. Now you got to manage people, and for some companies, out there, they don't have a leadership program in place. They don't have a development program in place, and then all of a sudden you find yourself in this position where you've got to lead people, and that's not really a fun job, if you want to say it like that, because there's a lot more to it than just telling people what to do. And especially if you want to, when you look at the places like LinkedIn, where they say, what's the difference between a leader and a manager? What's the difference between old school and new school? And we really identified a gap, especially when we go from our green belt to our black belt, is the fact that there's a lot of black belts out there and a lot of green belts out there managing massive projects, but they don't know how to bring people along for the ride. So they would achieve the results, they would do their project, they would get the credit for it. But a couple of months later or a few weeks later, the results start tapering down because they didn't properly entrench. They didn't bring people along for the ride. They didn't focus on stakeholder management. And because we identified this gap, we started looking at who's got a solution to that. And frankly, there's not a lot out there. I mean, there's a lot of leadership development programs. There's a lot of, stuff out there that tells people, well, you got to act like this as a leader or as a manager, but it doesn't give you any checklists. It doesn't give you any templates. It doesn't give you any tools to actually manage this process. So that's where the idea of the purple belt came from. We're busy in the process developing it at the moment. By the time this is, it will be published. But it's more to give people a proper understanding of what that next step is for them to develop in order to become a better leader, and for or just a leader in, and develop further on and mature before moving on to that next step. I mean, specifically these days, people are chasing job titles, they chasing money, they chasing all of that. But sometimes you got to take a step back and self-evaluate and use the tools and see, what type of personality you have, where should you work on, what the blind spots are. I mean, what type of programs do you use?
And at first, but I have to go back to that whole title chasing because you're right. I really,
Oh yeah.
when I was, yeah, I was in the job market. I was looking for a queen of learning and development, and I was having a really,
Oh, you
really
couldn't
hard
find
time.
it.
I couldn't find it. I couldn't find it. So I decided to start my own company, and I didn't even do that. I didn't call myself the queen of. Maybe I'll change my title. Maybe that's what I'll do. Uh,
Hey, you can
so
you can change whatever you want these days, so it's all good.
it doesn't matter. I learned that skill too. I learned that when I saw people with job titles that a lot of times the title didn't match the experience. And, my background is actually in HR.
Yeah,
So I started my career in human resources. And I will tell you, I saw gaps a lot in that space where somebody had been promoted and they struggled in that. So when you ask about like kind of that, what I've noticed in that same areas for leadership, and I think
yeah,
it's important that you mention things like personalities and dealing with different personalities because I think it's really vital to understand and appreciate that people are different than you. And
oh yeah,
it's really how you communicate to those people in a different way. So you see that's a lot. For instance, I like using DISC a lot. I think there's
yeah.
several different personality assessments out there. And I don't like to get hung up on, oh, you're this letter or this letter, because reality is that, everybody's unique. We've all had unique experiences. We've all had different exposures, but there's some similarities too. And so a profile like a DISC profile helps kind of align some of those personality and behavioral things that are
Yeah.
similar to other people. And
Have
so
you have you found that once people know which letter they are, that they actually become very proud of it and expect other people to change their behaviors?
Well, it's interesting. If you just take the test without any frame of reference and context, yes. In fact, I
Yeah.
I joke with people who try to use their letter as an excuse. They'll say, "Well, this is who I am. I'm an I,
Oh
and
yeah, I'm an artist.
I'm
Yeah.
an I. So I can just, I'm an influencer. I'm just somebody who talks all the time. I like
Yeah.
people.
I don't need to
It's
achieve
like
any goals.
I don't need to achieve goals. Goals are details.
Yeah.
Blah. So what I talk about that's a little different is I'm like, hey, it's great. Know who you are. I'm all about
Yeah.
self-awareness, take whatever personality assessment you want to take to discover that, whether it's Myers-Briggs or Caliper or DISC or the Facebook, which friends character are you, or which candy bar, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Personality is personality. What I try to teach when I teach leaders is one, start to understand and recognize the personalities and the types in other people. And as a leader, it's really more your role to adjust your communication style to your employees than it is your
Yeah.
employees to adjust to you. And I think that is the big change in leadership over the
Hmm.
last 20 or 30 years, because it used to be that title alone should signify trust, respect,
Yeah.
following. And if you're in a manager process, in other words, I'm dictating work to you, then
Yep.
sure. Then, yeah, you have the title, you have the authority to give those, whatever you want to be done, and you're paying them. So that's the only reliance they have, is that consequence and reward. But the
Yep.
minute something else comes around, the minute another opportunity opens up, the minute they don't agree with something, you're going to see it, because they're either going to leave or they're going to work behind your back to get you gone, or they're
Yep.
going to, be passive aggressive sometimes and say they're doing something and not do it. So you lose that potential. Or the worst, they'll do just the bare minimum. This is what you
Yep.
asked me to do. I'm doing it. And that lack of investment into the organization, into the team, and really into themselves is really
Yep.
going to cause problems in the long term of a company growing, developing, building, and being successful. So, and I will tell you, generationally, that has changed. It probably started with our generation of Gen
Yeah.
Xers that kind of pushed back against authority. But I think
Hmm.
it's really important now with like millennials and zillennials, the Z generation. They want to know that what they do means something. It's
Yeah.
not just about getting a paycheck. They want to be a part of something. They want to be more in a collaborative space. And so to do that as a leader, you're one person trying to understand and how to interact and engage with other people. So using a personality assessment as a building block and a tool, not as an excuse and a reason for behaving badly. That's the context of it. But again,
Well, I
you just
agree
go
with
take
you. I
the
mean, that's yeah. I mean, I agree with you. There's a lot of startups that we work with that, you can see people are just chasing titles. It's a question of someone's getting paid 60K a year, but they are the vice president of product for a massive company. It's like there's no ways that it adds up. But you also know that that person might need to be in that role for quite some time to actually develop into the role, and not the role develop around them. You know what I mean?
right.
So yeah, I mean it's quite an interesting dynamic once you start looking at specifically project management, RASI roles, all that kind of stuff, and you find that people don't really know what their actual role is, and no one's actually asking. So we we work with a few customers where things just get frustration after frustration after frustration because people go, well, that's not my job. This is someone else's job. So you get them involved. And then all of a sudden they go, well, that's not my job. That's yours. So, we usually start with going all the way back, doing the basics right, and making sure that we define the roles that people understand and that they actually agree on what their role is in the organization.
Mhm.
But then again, it's you also got the other side of it where do they really want to be in that situation, or are they only there because they've been told to it's a good place to be career wise. So it's pretty interesting. Um, so what else have you been up to?
Well, I'm glad you brought up. I'm really glad you brought up that kind of role assignment piece, and I think that is one of the keys to project management that is sometimes not a focus, and it really needs to be kind of in the beginning because, as you mentioned, people could have titles, but if you're working in a really effective project, you have stakeholders and people that are on the project that may have higher titles
Yeah, yeah,
organizationally than you, or hierarchy that's different than yours. But if you're managing that project, how do you manage up? So
yep,
that's another area that when I think about communication skills that I think would be important is that process of, giving feedback even to somebody that's above you, and giving feedback to your own peers, and getting feedback to your subordinates, but also the reverse, like asking for feedback,
Yeah,
getting
and being
feedback.
open to it.
Yeah, and that, a lot of that has to do with trust and building relationships. And I think, there's a lot of different theories about, those kind of behavioral skills and the benefits of them. But really when
Hmm.
it comes down to it, it's interpersonal. So it's really how you, well, intrapersonal first. So how you think about yourself. So some of that is that self-awareness. Some of it is like, for instance, when you talk about delegation, a lot of people
Yep.
struggle with delegation. And so especially if you're running a project, you have to learn to delegate. You have to trust that things are going to
Oh
be
yeah.
done, but then you also have to learn how to hold people accountable. And so, that kind of thing. So that's all internal. What you think about your own self, what you think about others, how you take feedback, but then also how do you engage with others? How do you communicate with others? How do you make sure that your message is clear and your intent is transparent? So
Yeah.
I've been focusing a lot on some trust areas and building trust as part of, that leadership communication and understanding self-trust and relationship trust and really organizational trust as well. So I think
Yeah.
that's kind of key. Do you have do you really see a need for that in where you're looking at with your organization and managing projects? Is that building trust piece of that?
Well, I think that's a massive part of it, and I think it's an area that gets really it's really underrated. I think people don't understand how important it is, especially when you're looking for sustainable results. So we focus a lot on sustainability with our results that we get for customers. But we always say, look, it's behaviors times results. It's both of them. We can't just get results. We can get that for you, but if you're not working on your culture and your behaviors on how you get those results, it's not going to be sustainable. And we've proven it. We've guaranteed it. We've walked away from customers because they refused to, basically focus on the behavioral side. They just wanted the results. It's like, fine, we can do that. You can look good at the end of the year, on your P&L, and you can take all the credit for all the changes happened, but we can guarantee you it's just going to go back to where it was. And it might even get worse than what it was because people didn't buy in. You didn't focus on, creating a culture of problem solving, of moving forward. And it's one thing to get short term results. It's nice to drive a car fast, but you can't drive it fast forever because it's going to break down. It doesn't matter what it is. So yeah, it's very important for us. We cover a lot of that in our green belt specifically, on how to achieve the results, all the tools. But we talk about stakeholder management in there too, and how to go ahead, how to do the basics right at the beginning. Make sure people understand their roles, make sure you've got the right people in the room, make sure you've got the right resources. It's amazing how many companies are out there trying to do 100 projects at the same time with two mechanical engineers. You know what I mean? It really is crazy. It's like especially in manufacturing, we get it. You want to change everything in a day, but it's just not going to happen. You got to methodically go through it and make sure that you do one thing at a time. And that's also how you change culture. It's like, it's not going to change by itself. You've got to start taking action. You got to measure yourself. You got to measure your KPIs, and that's what we do in our green and black belt. Is show people how to do that through tools and templates and actually doing it. But if you're doing it and people are yelling at you, you're probably doing it wrong. So that's the interesting part.
Mhm.
But had
Well,
a few of those. So you learn by doing.
I love that because I think it's really important to kind of address. I would call it the Mokita elephant in the room, right? Is
Oh
to
yeah,
address that a lot of organizations, maybe leaders, especially if they're a little bit more traditional, tend to think of soft skill training or behavioral training as soft. And,
yeah,
somebody comes in and gives them, a good show and people feel good and they feel influenced, but they don't have application in their real world. So
yeah,
one of the things that to overcome that, and that's why sometimes it's hard to measure the success of a training because there's not, that measurement piece is sometimes hard to build in. But it sounds like you're really focused on providing the right resources and tools to supplement that. And I design the same way. So I
Yeah,
don't just talk about trust. I give them a tool to measure trust. I don't just talk about communication. I give them a framework on how to create a communication, because I can
yeah,
tell you what the concepts are and what the behaviors should be and what the benefits are. But if I don't give you something that you can take away and apply and use right away, there's no way to really gauge whether it has made a shift or a change in how you
yeah,
work and the success of it. So I think that having the right tools is just as important as having the right message. That because people only get, are you ready for this? About 7 to 10% of what you say. 7 to 10. So all
what's
this
that?
work with trying to
I didn't
like
hear what you say.
7 or 10, that's all they remember, and which is
Yeah,
very
yeah.
frustrating for a public speaker to only have 7 or 10% of what you have
Well,
to say be
and
impacted.
a
But
parent. I mean, geez, you know how it goes.
yes,
But
so
no, that's true what you say. I mean, even in training situations, you know, they well, there's statistics that even if you don't go and put in practice what you've learned within like 2 days after doing a workshop, you lose 50% of the value. In 4 days, you lose like 70% of the value. You know, so the longer you wait, the more you lose. So the cool part for our online learning stuff and certifications is you can always go back and go look at the templates, go look at the 1 point lessons. But if you're in a training situation in real time, you're going to walk out there and literally only remember 10% of what was done that day. And I mean that's pretty cool if you think you're getting paid 100% for doing it. But at the end
sounds
of the
good.
day, it's at the end of the day, people. I think there's a real disconnect between realizing the value of the development and their self development. It's a personal thing. It's not something that should be dictated by a company. You should be looking after your own development and say, look, I need to do something to get to that next level. What is it? It's usually the softer stuff, like you say, but really, there's nothing soft about it. The people management part of working and being a manager, being in a leadership position is really really hard. Dealing with people's issues, finding the correct way of dealing with 100 different people in 100 different ways. There's nothing soft about it. So, when people call it the softer skills, I think, they refer to because it's nice to go sit in a room and listen to someone talk about trust, instead of holding them accountable to everything that's broken in the factory or in the business. But yeah, to me, there's definitely nothing soft about it. It's all about, what development do you need? What are you going to embrace? And how's it going to help you moving forward? So, we spoke about earlier, but can you explain to us what self mediation is, please?
Oh, I'd love that you're asking about that. So, yeah, so a lot of conflict resolution focuses on a issue, like a singular issue of conflict. And all in all, conflict's not bad. You don't want to have everybody have groupthink and everybody to agree
Yeah,
and people to be on the same page all the time, because it stifles innovation, it stifles
creativity, everything.
opportunities,
Yeah.
creativity. Yeah. So
I think it's important to say there's a difference between fighting and moving forward.
challenging. Yeah, I like using challenging better. I think it
Yeah,
sounds
yeah,
sounds more effective. So what self-mediation means is that I realize there's a conflict, and you can realize it's a conflict, but it's taking the ownership and accountability for addressing that conflict. And instead of just looking at the one thing, maybe it's somebody took your idea in a meeting, or somebody discounted your contribution, or somebody, used the microwave and didn't clean up after themselves. It could be anything, right?
that never
That
happens.
causes a conflict. But if you get to the point where you're questioning the value of the relationship,
Yeah,
so think people can do things that frustrate you, but when you're questioning what their intent is, then it's an opportunity for you to say, okay, stop, hold on. I know that this relationship is important because we work together, or we have to collaborate, or there's just a benefit for both of us. And I really feel like there's more benefits to interaction. You can't work alone in life. You have to interact
yeah,
with people. So Self-mediation is about saying, okay, it's not just this conflict, it's the relationship that needs to be repaired. And I'm going to take ownership and mediate the win-win of that relationship. So I'm going to go
Okay.
back and say to the person, basically, there's like four steps of identifying what the problem is, really communicating and finding out what the core issue is, because a lot of that core issue goes back to maybe lack of trust, lack of perception, lack of context. There's a
Oh
lot
yeah.
of reasons people don't align, and address that and
Mm-hmm.
look for ways to, come to an agreement on how you're going to communicate going forward and hold each other accountable. And I say win-win because a lot of times people go with this, competition feeling when it comes to conflict. Like, for me to
Oh
say
yeah.
this, then it means I have to either deny my feelings, or I have to agree with you, or those types of things.
Yeah.
And that's not true, because a win and a win could be totally different things. For instance, a win for me could be that you're going to give me an opportunity to tell you what I think before you make a decision. That may be the win for me.
Yeah.
I am the only person as an individual that can decide what a win is for me. So it
Mm-hmm.
goes back to that self mediation of, instead of me telling you how we're going to move forward, let's, collaborate, communicate, and have agreement on what's a benefit for both of us in this situation. So that's the cornerstone of that
Okay.
self-mediation process. It's a very different way of looking at conflict resolution,
Yeah.
because it does take a lot of more personal accountability. And even in the leadership training of it, it's about coaching and influencing your employees to use that self-mediation approach before
Yeah.
you have to step in and mediate a situation. But even once it gets to the point where the manager has to mediate, it's still more about having a collaborative conversation than it is dictating a solution.
Oh,
And I think
definitely. Yeah.
that's the big difference.
There should be a middle ground found, not just you will do this and you will do that, and end of story.
Right.
So it's actually interesting. That dovetails nicely with the thing we like to do, which is it's a very common term. I mean, service level agreements. We tend to, as a company, have service level agreements with our vendors, suppliers, that kind of stuff. But what we actually put in place with our certifications is service level agreements between departments and sometimes between people. But they don't necessarily see eye to eye. They've been working together for 40 years. They've been there for a while, and you always get one department complaining about another department. You always get sales complaining about manufacturing, or marketing complaining about HR, or whatever.
What?
So what we do is yeah, we never complain about HR.
No, everybody complains about HR. Even HR complains about HR. It's fine.
That's the
We're
fun
used to
part,
it.
because they never do anything about it. That's why.
Fine. Oh, we do. You just don't know.
It all happens behind the scenes.
That's all behind
Nah,
the
just
scenes.
joking. So the cool part that we do is we actually put these people together and we say, okay, well, what do you expect from this person? What do you expect from this, or group? And what do you do? What do you expect from the other group? And clearly articulate within 4 points or 5 points what exactly it is that you require. Not like this department's always late. You know, until you start looking at the data and you go, well, they're not really late for anything. They
Hmm.
just your perception of late and theirs are two different things.
Right.
So we start putting time limits on it, but then we start measuring it and we say, okay, well, how many times this week were you late? And then all of a sudden that the instances or the amount of times that happens starts going down, because people can see it on a wall, they can see the visual performance management, they can see how it all works, and no one likes a red next to their name. So that's how you start. That's how we technically, with a tool, start changing the way that people react to this. So we put a process in place. Instead of them, or instead of people taking on each other, they take on the process, and the process either works or doesn't. and if it doesn't work, replace it with something else. So
I
yeah,
like
so
that.
there's a lot of
And I like that cognitive agreement. I actually do that in training
yeah,
too. So instead of having like, rules or ground rules or policies or things like that, I like more of that agreement process of like, here, this is what these are the standards that
yeah,
I put into place for a training or an interaction or whatever it may be. And I want it to be a discussion. It's not just like,
yeah.
here's my rules for being a part of something.
This is
It's
what I
more about,
expect of you. Now go do it. It's
yeah,
like no,
go
no,
do
no,
it.
no. It works.
Yeah.
It works both ways, mate.
Right. So I like that idea of saying agreements. And the training class I taught yesterday, that was how I started the class was with what are the agreed agreements so that we can, here's what I am putting forward,
Yeah.
let's negotiate what you expect, what your expectations and
Well,
standards are.
and it's got
And
to work
that's
for
what,
both parties. Yeah,
yeah, I like that a lot. Well, actually, speaking
that's
of
cool.
agreement, I have a business lunch in like 30 minutes that I have to jump to, and I don't want to
Cool.
stop talking. Can we talk again soon?
Definitely. Look, I mean, this is just the beginning. I think this is our first little interview that we're doing. I think for us, we'll get together quite often to have a chat, and then also the development of the purple belt is in place. So
It's
that'll
so exciting.
that'll yeah, that's going to be exciting to get done. But yeah, I mean, we always have these interesting conversations. So thank you for joining me today, and I'll definitely be putting another placeholder in your calendar.
I'm looking forward to it. I'm looking forward
Cool.
to. I am really, and very excited about this purple belt. I'm excited about what Consult is going to be doing in this space and the opportunities for organizations to really take advantage of what you guys have available. So this is going to be very, very cool.
Cool.